Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am here to talk about Elektra by Jennifer Saint. Yet another Greek myth retelling that of course I had to read. This one, as the title does suggest, looking at the life of Elektra, who was daughter to Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. But this title, I will admit, is a little bit deceiving because not only are we looking at Elektra's life, not only are we looking at her perspective, but this story is also told from the perspective of her mother, Clytemnestra, as well as the Trojan princess and seer, Cassandra. This story is, as you can imagine, really heavily rooted in the mythology, and it's covering quite a lot of ground. We start off this story when Clytemnestra is quite young, when her sister, the beautiful Helen of Sparta, is choosing which suitor she's going to take as her husband. We see Helen decide that her husband is going to be Menelaus, as well as all of the suitors pledging that they will protect Helen and Menelaus's ownership of Helen. We see Clytemnestra meet and eventually marry Agamemnon. At the same time, we are also flitting back to Troy, seeing Cassandra's upbringing, the birth and banishment of Paris, Cassandra choosing to live as a priestess to the god Apollo, the god Apollo attacking Cassandra, and her refusal of him, leading him to curse her, with the famous curse that despite the fact that all of Cassandra's visions are true, no one is ever going to believe her, and the dastardly repercussions of that. My apologies, the light has just gone very wild right now. We see Clytemnestra bringing up her children, though we are primarily focused on Iphigenia and Elektra. And then of course we have the famous spiriting away of Helen being taken by Paris to Troy, which ends up kicking off the legendary Trojan War. This is a story where we're not really so much focused on the fighting, we are very much focused on the women who are left stranded. And especially looking at this war from the perspective of Clytemnestra, we end up having to see the brutal murder and sacrifice of her eldest daughter Iphigenia in order to appease the gods so that the 1,000 ships that will sail to Troy are able to do so. Following this brutal murder, we're seeing the next 10 years as Clytemnestra makes her plans for revenge. But also we see with her one-track mind of avenging her daughter, who she's leaving behind, primarily her daughter Elektra and her baby son Orestes. And we're seeing Elektra really resenting her mother. Every now and then we flit over to Cassandra to get a bit of a glimpse of what's happening at Troy. I'm not going to sit here and recount all of the events of the Trojan War, but of course at long last the Greeks do eventually win. We see Agamemnon take Cassandra as his own prize and brings her back to Mycenae, where Agamemnon expects to have a war hero's welcome, but that is quite the reverse of what he finds. We see Clytemnestra at long last being able to take out her revenge, sending him to get a bath, and after he's finished bathing himself, trapping him in a cloth and killing him. And then the rest of the book is the aftermath to this. If you're familiar with the Oresteia, you'll be very aware of what happens next and how revenge really begets more revenge. As you can tell, a lot of mythology is being crammed into this book, and I actually think that Jennifer Saint was able to balance this really well. I was surprised at how much I ended up enjoying this because you may know I read Ariadne, which was her debut novel, and actually didn't really like it too much. I remember at the time just kind of having met opinions of it, and as time has gone on, feeling more and more negative about it. Definitely seeing some areas of merit, but especially the pacing I found really uneven. The beginning 100 pages or so were really speedy and were able to get through a lot of the events of Ariadne's life very quickly, whereas it felt like the remaining 200-300 pages really dragged. A lot of people just kind of sat down telling each other their stories in a way that just didn't feel really interesting to me. And in that book we're not just looking at the perspective of Ariadne but also of her sister, but from what I remember we don't get Phaedra's perspective until a few hundred pages into the book, whereas in this one we are snapping very quickly backwards and forwards through the three different perspectives. And I feel like that constant switching actually really helped with the pacing of this book. But also because a lot of the chapters are so short, when you do get to a slightly more extended one, you really feel the weight and the significance of what is going on. Especially the most notable one, and my personal favourite chapter of this, is chapter 9, where Clytemnestra is told about Iphigenia's upcoming wedding to Achilles, with neither she nor her daughter expecting that this is going to be the sacrifice. And it's just this really lovely passage where Clytemnestra is getting her daughter ready for marriage, where she's walking along with her, trying to think about what she can say to her about marriage and about love. This section is just way too massive for me to read the whole thing out, but to just give you a little glimpse of what she's talking about. She's previously spoken about all of the stories that you hear about love, particularly of Orpheus and Eurydice, and she continues, "Those were the romantic stories of girlhood. They weren't the truth of marriage, so I could not tell my daughter of love exactly. I could hope that when she looked at Achilles, she would see enough of a kinship in his eyes to know that they might lead a peaceable, contented life together. I could tell her that the joy of true love would come when she held her first baby in her arms. Before then even, when she felt it roll and squirm within her, when she sang to her growing belly and placed her hands on the warm taut skin and marvelled at the unimaginable miracle that was to be hers. But I could remember the panic I had felt myself at contemplating such a thing, the fear that walked hand in hand with the happiness, the shadow that hung across that joyful prospect. When I looked at my slim little daughter, I could not help but feel the worry stir within me. We would lay down our lives for our children. And every time we faced birth, we stood on the banks of that great river that separated the living from the dead. A massed army of women facing that perilous passage with no armour to protect us, only our own strength and hope that we would prevail. It didn't feel like the right conversation to have on the way to her wedding. We then follow on as she takes her daughter to the wedding, the very quick realization of what is going to happen, and Clytemnestra being unable to stop this brutality. The cruelness of how these men leave Iphigenia's body dropped on the floor and then promptly leave. She's left to pick up the pieces to deal with her daughter's death with no closure, with no explanation from her husband. We see her sadness, her grief, but then we also see her anger build. And at the end of that chapter, you're right along with her when she decides that she is going to take her vengeance out on Agamemnon. You really feel every emotion that she's going through, and it's just such a beautiful passage. Despite the fact that a lot of these women are outside of the action, constantly waiting for news, and a lot of the story is very much internal, but you feel how these women's minds process what is going on, and also you get to see these little moments of connection. Whenever Clytemnestra hears pieces of news about what's going on at Troy, she connects her own life and her own story to some of these figures that she doesn't know. When Clytemnestra takes Aeschylus, I can't say that name. Aeschylus? Aeschylus. I can't do it. When she takes that guy as her lover, how she connects herself to Helen and Paris, wondering if this is how her sister felt when she took a lover. When Achilles took revenge on Hector for the death of Patroclus, she really feels a kinship for this man that she's never met, because she too is fueled by that same fire for revenge, and how she would commit any brutal act in order to achieve her goal. I would say in terms of themes, this is kind of a book of two halves. For the first section, especially when we are looking at Cassandra, it's a book that is very much about fate and inevitability. For Cassandra, it's very obvious. She gets these visions of what's about to happen in the future, but being powerless to do anything about it because no one will listen to her, no one will believe her visions. Whereas for Elektra and Clytemnestra, the curse of the House of Atreus is really what is driving their minds and the actions. Clytemnestra first hears about how there is this curse on the House of Atreus where the descendants are constantly murdering each other. Shouldn't laugh at that, really. Every generation there is always some brutal, bloody act. And as much as Clytemnestra and Elektra want to step away from this curse, want to be the end of it, they end up perpetuating the violence. This curse is something that Clytemnestra knows about, and yes, while it can be argued that what Agamemnon did to Iphigenia was not Clytemnestra's choice, her reaction to it definitely was. Her lust for revenge perpetuated this curse. How much we force down a certain path and how much of it is our choice. That's something that the first, especially like 2/3 of this book, are really dealing with. Whereas the latter half of the book is really dealing with the consequences of revenge. Like I say, this book is very much about revenge begetting more revenge. How do you stop a cycle of violence? Clytemnestra absolutely believes that she is in the right, and you know, with her perspective, you can really sympathise with her, even as she does brutal, bloody acts. And through this narrative, you really start to sympathise with her, even when she's doing the most atrocious things. And I think that's a real skill of Jennifer Saint in constructing this narrative. However, at the same time, you're really getting a chance to see what Clytemnestra is losing by her single-minded crusade for justice. And that's really having a connection to her children. She's so focused on avenging Iphigenia that she completely neglects Elektra and Orestes. And really, she had the biggest advantage over Agamemnon. She had 10 years where he wasn't in the picture in order to cultivate a family dynamic and really get her family over onto her side. And yet by the end, she really has no one. And it's really very sad to see. Even though Elektra and Orestes do end up perpetuating even more revenge, by the end of it, you get a sense that they're going to do a little bit better than Clytemnestra did because they have a support system within their own group. But that isn't to say that Elektra especially is left unscarred. I would say if I had any criticism of this book, I really didn't always see why it was necessary to have the Cassandra chapters. It's always good, you know, to have an eye on the ground of Troy. And of course, she does have some connection to Agamemnon, is the prize that he claims after the Trojan War. And at first I thought the reason that she was chosen as one of the point of view characters was in order to have this narrative which bounced between the different women of Agamemnon's life. His wife, his daughter, his slave. But we really don't have any scenes between Agamemnon and Cassandra. She certainly fulfills the theme of inevitability, of fortune and fate and curses. But I do also feel like you could take her out and the story wouldn't be any the worse. That's not to say I didn't enjoy her chapters. I think having her in there, Jennifer Saint was able to build up a really interesting, compelling story, but I feel like if you can take those chapters out and not lose anything in the overall story of Clytemnestra and Elektra, then is it really necessary? I don't know. I'll leave that with you. And yeah, I was really surprised. This was a really excellent Greek myth retelling. Considering I had such a meh experience with Ariadne, I was really pleasantly surprised. As always, have to have a moment for this beautiful, beautiful cover. I feel like Jennifer Saint gets all of the best covers. And also, can we talk about this little Trojan horse? This little teeny tiny Trojan horse. I would give my life for this little teeny tiny Trojan horse. It's just so cute. So there we go. Those are all of the thoughts that I had about Elektra by Jennifer Saint. Do let me know if you have read this, what you thought about it. Have I made you more or less interested in picking this up? I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.